بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. To everybody here and to those listening live, Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My name is Mansoor. I was asked to give a little bit of a talk on our pathway towards heaven, or Jannah as you say in Arabic. As I like to do before I give any type of talk, the verse of the Quran that I just recited is one that you may hear a lot when you hear speakers give some sort of presentation, give a speech, etc. What it is it's the prayer of the Prophet Moses, Nabi Musa alayhi salam, and he's asking Allah to to give him assistance, but to also help with his tongue, to loosen the knot of his tongue. And so I just wanted to throw that in because obviously this is educational, and every little bit where we can, we try to educate each and every one of us as best as we can. So this verse of the Quran, إِنَّ الْمُتَّقِينَ فِي جَنَّةٍ وَالنَّهْرٍ. Indeed, the righteous will be amid gardens and rivers. So muttaqi, in other words, somebody who has taqwa, is somebody who is God conscious. And I'm going to get into this concept of God consciousness a little bit later. Now, this path that we as human beings take, this is a universal path. This is something for anybody who believes in God and believes in the concept of life after death, and believes in something better after one's temporary life is ended. This is something that we ideally would all like to strive for. But the question is this something that's difficult to attain and achieve? I would argue that it's not, and sometimes, especially for those of us who have been exposed to very what they say, the fire brimstone type of approach to things, we may think, oh my God, Allah is like, we perceive Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, God, kind of like Zeus, the god of war or something, where any little mistake, boom, that's it, you're done, case over. It's nice knowing you. Sometimes we have that kind of mentality, and we don't realize how merciful Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala really is. He's a Rahman and Rahim. And in fact, 113 out of 114 chapters of the Quran begin with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Allah the most compassionate, the most merciful. It doesn't begin with the most vengeful, the most, the one who's going to get you. So I think it's important to keep this in mind. Not that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that there's no concept of justice. See, we have to kind of strike a balance there. This is, according to Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, a believer lives between hope and fear. Now, what does it mean when you live between hope and fear? You have hope and desire and a hopeful expectation that you'll get heaven for all the things that you've done, the good deeds that you've done, the way you lived your life. But there's also it's a check and balance. There's also a fear. There's a certain fear that you're on guard, that you're not going to step out of bounds, or at least make efforts not to step out of bounds. And what do I mean? That you won't be careless about sinning or going against whatever boundaries Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has set for us in this life. And I'm going to get into that in a little bit more detail. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to use any excuse to get you into heaven. It's not, we don't want to see this as a very kind of like super extremely selective process. Sometimes that's how we kind of see it. That doesn't mean that there's nothing that doesn't mean that it's just a free meal ticket. No. I mean, there's obviously certain things that we have to do, certain beliefs that are important for us to incorporate. But it's not necessary for the average person to have super advanced, have a PhD in Quranic studies or advanced theology as we traverse in this path towards heaven that, inshallah, we all pray for. Now, one of the pieces in this puzzle As I mentioned a little bit earlier, this concept of taqwa, God consciousness. And having God consciousness is what true piety is really all about. Sometimes we think of the religious person as somebody maybe who's the most strict, somebody who is, well, sometimes we look at very external representations of religion. Like, so for example, as Muslims, sometimes we see somebody maybe who has like a very, very long beard, or has a lot of facts, a lot of Quran or Hadith memorized, whose Arabic is very good, or somebody who wears like the dishdasha the whole time, the thobe, or somebody who wears a niqab. You know, these are sometimes the impressions we get of like, oh, this person must be super pious, and that's not necessarily the case. The true pious person is the one who thinks about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not always manifest in the quantity in which somebody say prays or fasts. You know, obviously a pious person prays, a pious person fasts. But does this pious person, when they pray or fast, are they praying because it's a habit? Or are they praying because they're thinking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they're trying to have that connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So that's something to think about. Now, when you're this is something to think about when it comes to somebody who is God conscious. When faced with a moral quandary, do we ask ourselves if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would be okay with what our final decision is when it comes to making a decision? So let's say, for example, I'm doing business, and I have this opportunity to, you know, maybe nobody's going to see it. Maybe I'll undercut this person. Maybe I'll take a little money away from this person. No one's going to notice it. Well, somebody will notice. Maybe a human being won't notice it, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's watchful over all things. He'll notice that. So this is an example. What type of work do we do? I mentioned work because this is something that occupies a significant portion of our time, if not the majority of our time. When we choose the type of work we do, what are we thinking? Are we thinking, hey, I'm only interested in making money? And again, there's nothing wrong in being interested in making money. We have to be able to make money in order to support ourselves, our families, our communities, etc. But are we concerned about what kind of work we do? For example, if I'm like, hey, you know what? How about I open up a liquor shop? Or maybe, what if I say, hey, you know what? I can make a lot of money selling drugs. And I'm talking about illegal drugs, not prescription drugs. Now, yeah, sure. I might be able to make a lot of money doing these kinds of things, like these illegal or other things that are not Islamically permissible, like say opening up a liquor shop. But if somebody is on this path of God consciousness, they'll think, wait a minute, does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala really want me to open up a liquor shop? Would He be pleased if I open up a liquor shop? Would He be pleased if I spent all my time being a bartender? You know, again, and I'm not talking about cases where somebody's doing something out of necessity. You know, and this is not like in any way, shape, or form an invitation to like judge people who maybe they're in a position where they're having difficulty finding work. They're working as a bartender, not because they enjoy that work, but right now they can't function. Again, I'm speaking hypothetically here. So these are just some things to think about. Again, the key being God consciousness. Whatever it is I think, I see, or do, is God in part of this equation. Another thing to think about as we traverse on this path towards heaven is understanding the devil. Now, I've given a lecture. If anybody ever wants to see this lecture, I gave a lecture on lessons from the devil. Now, it sounds like an unusual topic. Lessons from the devil. Was Mansoor talking about devil worship or something? No, don't worry. I'm not going to draw like a pentagram or a star. I'm not going to, do anything like that. But the Quran. What's interesting about the Quran is that you can extract lessons. You can extract lessons from people who took opposing actions. So when it gives examples of the prophets in the Quran, these are examples of what we should be doing and lessons that we can take. When we look at Shaitan, he's an example of what we should not be doing And so it's very important to pay attention to some of the things that Shaitan did and what lessons are from that. And the biggest one is arrogance. That was his downfall, ultimately. Now, what makes it even more interesting to understand Shaitan is that Shaitan is somebody who prayed a lot, who was with the angels. He even spoke to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala directly. I mean, how many of us as human beings, no matter how pious we are, can say, hey, I spoke to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala directly? No. I mean, that's how high Shaitan was. And his ultimate downfall was that he thought, Ana khayra minhum. I'm better than this lump of dirt. I mean, well, he literally was thinking about our great-great-grandfather, the Prophet Adam, Nabi Adam alayhi salam. Now, this arrogance is such a dangerous thing that we have traditions that say from the Ahlul Bayt that if there's even a drop of arrogance in our hearts, we will not be able to enter heaven. So this is actually a very serious thing to pay attention to. Now, can we be arrogant about our own worship? Yep, absolutely. Just because we're doing what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asks us to do, we might not be doing it for the right intentions. Or we might be doing it, for example, okay, look at me, I'm the greatest Muslim on earth. I do so many great prayers and nobody's better than me. Or we can look down on other people. That person barely prays. Who does he think he is? I'm better than them. No, you're not. Just because somebody prays better, just because you pray more than someone is not licensed to say that you're somehow superior to that person. Or, for example, even let's say, for example, with our sisters and women, maybe you wear hijab and another person doesn't wear hijab. Like, oh, she doesn't wear hijab. What a loser. I mean, again, these are the kind of sentiments that we think, and we look down on people who may not, quote unquote, be as practicing as we are. This is a form of arrogance. Now, I actually highlighted something, even alcohol. Now, what do I mean by that? Now, there's several converts in this room, so you'll understand where I'm coming from with this better than people who might have been born into the faith. Now, it's one thing, for example, and I can use myself as an example, a personal example. Now, I grew up in a family that was relatively practicing. I was born and raised here, but we grew up in a family and family surroundings. Alcohol wasn't a part of it, so it wasn't a personal struggle because I didn't grow up in that environment. Now, take for example somebody who grew up in that environment, and through no fault of their own, etc., they become addicted to it, or they wind up having struggles with it. Then they decide to embrace the faith. Now for them, if they struggle with the addiction, that person trying to get off of that addiction, that's their struggle. That's their work, they're dealing with struggle also to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I can't simply pat myself on the back and say, oh, mashallah, I don't drink alcohol. Well, I didn't have that kind of test growing up because I wasn't in a family environment where I was tested with alcohol. But somebody who was given that test, who was tested early on, who may have had different problems. I mean, again, I know we have a couple therapists here. Alcohol is often a coping mechanism as well. Not a very healthy coping mechanism, but it's a coping mechanism when people suffer from stress and so forth. But the fact that the person's trying to get out of that is what should be lauded. It's where you're going, not where you're at. So these are the things that are important to kind of just pay note to and be mindful of. Okay. Now, one of the things that as we traverse on this path towards heaven is, keeping a few things in mind, like some of the early things, but also staying away from prohibited things. I mean, that when we do prohibited things, that classifies as if we do it knowingly and willingly, knowing that it's a sin willfully, then it's considered sin. It's not, if I didn't know, then it's not considered a sin. If I know something's a sin, then yes, I have, as part of this pathway towards heading towards heaven, these are things I have to keep in mind. So some things, for example, making sure your livelihood is halal. I gave the early example. Is it okay for me to open up a liquor shop just because, there's a lot of money in it? Yeah, I may make a lot of money, but does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala want me to open up a liquor shop? Is my food halal? Like, for example, am I eating things that are Islamically permitted? Intimate relationships, for those of us in intimate relationships, are those halal? These are some of the things to keep in mind when we want to go on a path of staying away from prohibited things of haram. There's also the mandatory acts, the wajib. I mean, the Shia generally use the term wajib. That's something I tend to use the term fard more. But among the followers of the school, Ahlul Bayt, we tend to use the word wajib to indicate the mandatory things that we should be doing. And again, from those of other schools of thought, you'll find them often using the term fard more than wajib. So we have our daily prayers. We have our obligation towards others. And there's also, and for those of us, for example, maybe we have a family to take care of or other people, we have financial obligations towards other people. The financial obligations could be, for example, taking care of your family members, could be paying back a loan that you borrow from somebody, like another person, being honest in your financial transactions with others. These are some of the things to keep in mind. I mean, there are several mandatory acts in Islam. You think of the prayers, fast, Hajj, etc. Yes, of course, prayers it is important for us as Muslims to maintain our daily prayers and also to strive to. And again, when I say all this, I include myself in this. So I'm not saying that I'm immune or exempt from any of this. I like everyone, like all human beings, like myself, I struggle with a lot of these things as well. So the reason I'm saying that is I don't want to come off as a hypocrite. So the judgment, they're like, Mansoor talked a lot about this, but he didn't. He talked the talk, but he didn't walk the walk. But I'm here to say that, hey, this is also advice. All these things are an advice to myself as well as to all of us collectively. So here's something that I kind of, and this is like the ending of the presentation. Maintaining good akhlaq. Akhlaq meaning manners. It's treating people with respect, not using harsh verbal language, not being judgmental, helping others as best as we can. These are some of the things that, when it comes to maintaining good akhlaq, it's important for us to keep in mind. Sometimes, for example, we look at somebody praying a lot or maybe fasting a lot. These are good things, don't get me wrong. But we overlook these types of things, like the akhlaq, the manners, the way we treat other human beings. Like, for example, if some ignorant person addresses you, just learning to walk away from getting involved in that drama. What's that saying? Not my circus, not my monkeys. If you've heard that expression, not to get involved in drama, not to create drama, not to start drama. And so some of these things that I kind of pieced up little by little are kind of what I would say is hopefully a helpful blueprint roadmap for those of us who are interested in traversing towards the path of heaven and righteousness.